Ever since my TEDx Talk cracked millions of views, and as it has been ascending, people from around the world have been banging down the door of my inbox asking me, how can I memorize a presentation? But you might be wondering what qualifies me to talk about memorizing presentations beyond just this one TEDx Talk. That's a really good question, because I spent a decade before I ever got into teaching memory teaching at 3 universities around the world and gave presentations in more than one language. And I didn't always memorize them in exactly the same way. I also used to, go and do spoken word presentations. Believe me, you probably don't want to hear any of my spoken word unless you're really into avant-garde, well, let's just call it weirdness. And another thing that's interesting here is I spent pretty much 2 years, hardly missed a week, giving live streams. Hello, everybody. And I do those in yet another way, and I present from my memory in a multitude of ways, all of which is to say that I've got a lot of different kinds of presentation styles, and I want to share them with you in this video. So if you love memory, make sure to hit that thumbs up, get subscribed if you're not already subscribed, and visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com for the free course that thousands of people around the world have completed and experienced more than just memory improvement. They've experienced absolute joy, pleasure, and fun, because using your memory in the magnetic way is about feeling excited and alive, and you are truly missing out if you don't have the magnetic memory method part of that puzzle in your memory practice stack. So when you need to memorize a presentation, here's where to start. And this is the tricky bit. It's not that tricky, but it's sometimes tricky to get yourself to do it, I know. Before that I gave a presentation at the 2016 Berlin Polyglot Gathering, for example, I kind of didn't feel like doing this step, but it's really, really important. Sometimes I like to just go and present whatever's on my mind that morning, or that day, or that afternoon. But I thought, I really want to make this golden for people. So what I did is I thought about the audience. I thought, what's the one thing that I could cover in a sufficient amount of detail that would help them walk away with an amazing insight that would enable them to accomplish a goal? Now, different presentations are not going to be exactly like that. Sometimes you want to accomplish several goals for people or have multi-layers of information that they take away, like the one I'm giving now is a little bit more nuanced. There's a couple of moving parts to giving a presentation from memory. But the important thing is that even to do this presentation, I have thought, what's the major thing that people need to understand? And the major thing is that there's no presentation worth memorizing until that you've thought deeply about what's the one thing you want your audience to take away from this. And this is so critical because my TEDx talk, for example, was really easy to memorize because I was so passionate about applying the memory techniques to the message that I crafted by thinking deeply about what the audience wants and how it can enable them in their lives. And that's part of the reason why it got multiple millions of views. And it's part of the reason why my polyglot presentation was also so successful, to the point that I got amazing feedback. I even got a mind map that somebody drew of my presentation, which is a huge compliment. Not only did the ideas transfer across, but they were worthy enough to spend the time to create a beautiful piece of mental art out of it. So that comes from not the memorization of the presentation, it comes from deeply connecting with the audience, and that comes from thinking about who it's for and how it's going to deliver the most impactful things. The rest is just memory mechanics, and those things are fun. So let's dive into them next. Now, there's a place for spontaneously speaking off the top of your head, but typically you want to script your presentation and script it in a way that makes it easier for you to memorize. Now, my TEDx talk, for example, is pretty easy to memorize because I based it on pages from a book that I wrote called The Victorious Mind. At some level, I just pulled some of the opening of the book and pulled some of the ending of the book, threw in a couple of additional quotes that aren't in the book, and other things, and just bang, had the speech and was able to memorize it because the book was written by me and it was structured to guide the reader through the experience in the way that good writing is. This sentence is designed to get you through the next sentence, etc. That comes from scripting. Now, you might get into perfectionism with scripting, and I encourage you not to do that. For example, there's a big error in my TEDx Talk script, and that error is that I ultimately didn't tell the people that I am effectively still an atheist, and a lot of people misunderstood. My fault, but they misunderstood what I was saying, because then they said all this stuff about, how I should still be an atheist or leaving atheism is dumb or whatever. And that's my fault, because atheism itself is kind of a dumb concept, and I should have went a little bit harder that I'm still an atheist, but that's just more words filling our consciousness, yada, yada, yada. Out of context, that might not make that much sense, but if you've seen my TEDx Talk, it'll make a lot of sense. The point is that scripting errors happen, and you're not going to avoid them, so don't get into perfectionism. Just do the best that you can to write a script where the first sentence makes it really, really essential for the person to keep listening and go into the second sentence, the third sentence, and so on. That's the job of each sentence, to draw you into the next sentence. So scripting is key. Spend as much time on it as you can, and I think that you'll find that your memorization process goes a lot faster because you yourself lead yourself to each successive sentence, because you've made it do its work. It interests you enough to keep reading your own speech. The next thing you want to do is review the presentation. And the review process can happen in different ways, one of which is you just practice while you're walking around the streets, reciting your speech, or ideally you record yourself and have other people watch the recording. So you're reciting it from memory, and you have some feedback from people. If you can do it live, that's great. But for my TEDx Talk, for example, I had enough time to record myself speaking it and got some feedback. And that feedback was cool. I just then made a couple of tweaks. Not the most high impact tweak that I could have made with that mistake that I mentioned, but nonetheless, it was still a very, very good process to correct another thing that I think was absolutely essential. And, if you ever have any questions about what that one thing that I corrected that I think was so essential that helped it succeed so much, let me know, because it's a really cool little tip that is really about scripting and scripting well. And almost every talk is going to have a version of this. So basically, get it reviewed. Now, there's a couple more principles I want to share with you that have to do with the memorization part. So, if you like this so far, make sure you're smashing that thumbs up to help people around the world start finding the memory tradition. It helps tickle those robots, and those robots need to be doing more to help people remember the great memory tradition. Thank you for your help with that. Answer this really important question before you proceed, and if you like, let me know your answer in the comments. Why are you memorizing your speech in the first place? What is it about memorizing the presentation that you think is going to add to it, as opposed to just reading from a script or working from bullet points on a screen? Hannah Pishwa in Language and Memory says that Aristotle really talked a lot about rhetoric and how that we can use rhetoric to persuade people in our talks. And I'll go a step further, because Aristotle also said that being able to recite talks from memory is additionally persuasive when you have rhetorical strategies in your speech, because people respond a lot more to speakers who are not hunting their minds for ideas. It's like they are a stone's throw, the thought comes from their mind and it goes directly to the mind of the listener. And I think that that's one of the major reasons to memorize a talk, so that you have the message accepted so much more fluidly, because you're not hunting around for the ideas. You have them directly ready to go, which leads to your own conviction and helps convince your audience of the validity of what you're saying. Now, since long before the days of ye old Aristotle, people have been using a technique called the memory palace to help them memorize their speeches. This is the memory palace I used to memorize my TEDx talk. And it is a memory palace because what I did is I took space and then I organized that space into magnetic stations, and onto those magnetic stations I placed images or associations, magnetic imagery, that helped me remember the words in the speech. Or better said, helped me commit the words of the speech to memory as quickly as possible. This is an alternative to rote learning. So I could have done it by rote, but that would have been boring, painful, and not particularly good brain exercise, because studies have shown that rote learning reduces your critical thinking. And we don't want that. I certainly don't want that. Do you want that? I hope not. To create your first memory palace, I suggest you just draw it. If you need instructions, help with drawing memory palaces in the most optimal way so that you can, in 2 to 5 minutes, have an incredibly powerful tool, make sure to visit magneticmemory.com, sign up for my free course. It's going to help you understand the principles behind this very, very quickly and enable you to get the benefit of this technique so that it's very, very efficient. But we do start with effectiveness first, because efficiency ain't coming unless you have effectiveness first. So it's very, very important. It's a real course. It's free. It's at magneticmerrymethod.com. Now, these little associations, they have some principles behind them that are really, really key. So if the speech begins with, how would you like to completely silence your mind? Well, how? What am I going to do? That's a kind of weird word. It doesn't really suggest any imagery until you think about the fact that how is in Howie Mandel. It's also in Howard Stern. So on the first station of the Memory Palace, you could imagine one of those celebrities, a celebrity that you ideally want to have spent a couple of dozen hours with, if not more, and they're going to be vibrant. They're easy to animate in your mind to get them to do zany things, like smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube, right? Because how would you like Howie Mandel throwing wood to smash a like button would be an example. There's many, many possible ways to do it. If you read the blog post version of this video, you'll see that I give you yet another version. And you know what? I don't really remember exactly how that I used Howie Mandel in that moment. And it doesn't matter, because the memory techniques really are about the core information. Your dexterity with the techniques come from your knowledge, your understanding, and your practice using them. But that's the basics. You just make sure to look at the words, find associations that are already magnetic because they're dynamic people in the world. And if you don't know enough dynamic people already, don't worry. There are solutions for you. You just got to get a little bit more deeper into the memory world. But I believe it is my firm conviction, it's why I do what I do, and I do it continually without pause, that each and every person can nail this. This skill is easy, and that's the core of it. So, Memory Palace plus zany associations that are based on already dynamic figures, so they magnetize themselves in space by virtue of their familiarity with you and their ability to be zany always already, because Howie Mandel, let's face it, is a zany person, as is Howard Stern. So this reduces the cognitive load, it reduces the amount of work that's needed, and it just allows you to rapidly memorize the presentation so you can get it into the next stage, which is really, really important for that fluidity of demonstration and that fluidity of delivery that Aristotle was talking about. So how do you do that? You've set up a bunch of zany, crazy, wild, highly specific magnetic images in a memory palace, following a journey that basically reproduces your speech as if you were writing graffiti on the walls. You want to get it into long-term memory. Well, you need to follow certain patterns, and these patterns will get the speech into your long-term memory very, very quickly. You need to use it effectively, and when you do this, you'll get very, very efficient at it, and you'll be able to memorize multiple presentations, as I have, and it is so incredible and fun to be able to do it. Now, those patterns, they require a little bit of time to explain. So again, I'm just going to pitch you on my course at magneticmerrymethod.com so you can learn what it is. They're in video 4. And those patterns, when you use them, they're going to give you the best that memory science has to offer. And they're basically based on cool terms that you can memorize if you want, but you don't have to. But rest assured that these are ancient and they're very, very fun to use, and they're all scientifically validated. They've done brain scans of the memory champions that show that anybody can use them, and you can too. But here's a little tidbit on how that I did this in order to make it fast with my TEDx talk, for example. I wrote out my TEDx talk backwards. And that sounds crazy, right? Now, I didn't do it in the way that I was writing the sentences backward, but I started with the last sentence, wrote the sentence or the penultimate sentence that we would use to use sophisticated words that are fun to memorize, and then the sentence before the penultimate sentence and so forth, and wrote that backwards. And I know that sounds crazy to do, but the reality is, if you want to have that ancient art of memory sizzling out your ideas through the air like a steak that people devour as if there was no tomorrow, then that is how it works. It takes mere minutes, and it is worth it. And that's just one of the patterns, but I highly encourage you to understand the technique, why that it works, why we do it that way, and that is just a thing you can take away. If you just start doing that now with your presentations, you're going to find that you remember them a lot better and they are a lot more bulletproof when it comes to showtime. Now, what if you're in a pinch? Well, here's how to memorize a speech fast. I've been invited at the last minute to many, many talks around the world. I didn't have time to even pull pages out of my books and rearrange them a little bit so that they could become a proper speech. I have just cooked up the ideas that I wanted to talk about, and I organized them in order, and then I made a simple little acronym. So I have a speech that I give to business talks. People often ask me to talk about business, and so I go and I do that, and I often teach them the free model. Now, I don't necessarily tell them that it's the free model. It's just a little acronym that I came up with to organize some thoughts and make them very, very easy for me to remember what they were. So this is the nice little sweet spot between memorized content verbatim and being able to just kind of make stuff up on the fly. Not really making stuff up on the fly, but jazz, iterating on ideas that are near and dear to me, the very ideas that got me invited in the first place. So it's not like I need to organize them in a fixed speech like you would do at a TEDx presentation. So, for example, FREE stands for frequent messaging to a relevant audience to entertain, educate, and engage them. Now, I know that there's 3 E's there, but this is, it doesn't matter. It's your rules. You pick the acronym. I have a lot of acronyms that I use. DOC. Doing is the origin of competence, for example. I have a whole speech based on that, and it has other acronyms that are built into it so that if I'm asked to speak about memory and I don't want to memorize a speech or verbatim isn't appropriate to the occasion, I just go and I use these acronyms to remind me not only of what to say, but the optimal order in which to deliver the content. So, how do you get started with that? Well, it comes back to where we started. Scripting after you've thought about the audience that you're addressing. You can spend 5 minutes thinking about that audience. Use some mind mapping to help you maximize the value of that 5 minutes if you've only got 5 minutes. And if you've got more time, spend more time. But this is really where speeches become memorable, both to yourself and to the people that you give them to. Now, I'm thinking that I might do a cohort course about giving speeches from memory. So if you want to be notified, make sure to go to magneticmemorymethod.com, put your email in the little box. I'll give you a free course that will help you understand the fundamentals of what we talked about today. And then when that course goes live, we'll get together serious speakers who really want to nail their talks and feel freer to just dive in and accept those invitations that you get and speak more freely from your mind using things like acronyms. It's going to be an absolute blast, but you want to make sure to get notified. If you're watching on YouTube, get subscribed. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to be subscribed to that podcast. But the mothership is magneticmemorymethod.com. Now, I got one more tip for you before we go so that you're able to absolutely crush your presentations. And this tip is to simply relax your body, focus on your breath before you step out onto stage, and let go of the outcome. Nobody can control what's going to happen. There could be an earthquake. There could be somebody who stands up and heckles you, and you want to just be able to roll with the punches. I've had to roll with the punches so many times. I have seen books where you have all kinds of snappy comebacks to hecklers. I was a magician for a long time and I got lots of those things. And I decided, you know what? I'm not going to get the book on how to be snotty in return to snotty people and, have these constant comebacks and slaps in the faces and all that stuff. I'm just going to let go of the outcome and allow whatever emerges to emerge. And there's an example of this in my TEDx talk. It's hidden, only I sort of know about it, but there was a little bit of a thing that happened that's not really visible on the camera. But anyway, I was talking about keyboard warriors. That was a response that just spontaneously emerged, and I'm very glad that it emerged in the way that it did, because you could never anticipate such a thing happening, and you could never perfectly execute whatever it is that you wanted to. And ultimately why I find this so important and why I'm mentioning it is because there's a mental torture that goes on. Jacques Lacan the Great, or maybe not so great, depends on your opinion. He was a great, French psychoanalyst who accomplished a lot and wrote a lot of books that people argue about to this day. He said something that really impacted me and is part of why I learned to just let go of the outcome. He said that the mind will torture you. It almost always wants to think about the many, many different ways that things could have happened. The problem is that they happened the way that they happened, and no amount of mental recitation and torture is going to change the past. So you're better off learning how to be satisfied with dissatisfaction, because it's almost certainly going to come. And you can use that mental power, that mental energy that comes from letting go of the outcome, to memorize your next presentation. So I hope this helped you out. Thanks for being here. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic and present magnetically.